Welcome to I Hate James Dobson, a podcast hosted by two very average people.
Oh, heartbreaker.
I read that yesterday. Welcome to I Hate James Dobson. My name is Jake, a former evangelical turned queer sex therapist. And today, as in all good days, I am joined by the knowledgeable, kind, kooky, and kinky, a kindred spirit and a keeper, Brooke.
Oh,
Brooke,
I love that.
let's fetch.
One of your best.
Thank you. Brooke, how is your new year going? Yeah?
It's not usually like a hard question. Fine. It's going fine.
That's very convincing.
Yeah. It's like when my clients come in crying and I'm like, I'm fine. I got this big dumb cup for Christmas and I've been really enjoying that.
And you got your cat a big dumb cup?
I got my cat a big dumb cup and I got a little dumb cup to put on top of my big dumb cup. So I'm enjoying that. For everyone who hasn't seen that skit, it's a Stanley cup. I'm not enjoying, like the world being literally on fire, and also that now we have to have that Donald Trump again.
Yeah. Thoughts and prayers, unironically, to everyone in Los Angeles, including Kevin and Kelly.
Oh, Kevin and Kelly are in Los Angeles?
Yeah. As far as I know, as of today, have not had to evacuate their house, thankfully. But
good.
We were on vacation together, and just every couple hours be like, house is still there.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Brooke, how are you doing in the dead of a Chicago winter?
Oh, my God. It's gray. And, okay, did you ever watch South Park? Do you know what that is? Have you ever heard of a show called South Park?
Do I know the show South Park?
Yeah.
Yes, I am familiar.
There was an episode back in the 90s where it's like, blah, blah, blah. They weren't allowed to celebrate Christmas or anything like non-secular, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were doing like a Christmas pageant and then just became a pageant. And then at the end, it was just them, all the kids dressed in gray, being like, gray, gray, darkness, darkness, winter. And that is always in my head this time of year. Gray, gray, darkness, winter, cold.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I feel. Chicago's not at its shining beauty in January.
No, it is not. What everyone told me my first year here, which is true, is if you can get through a Chicago winter, you're going to love it in the summer.
Yeah, that's true. I say that to people all the time. This is what I call potato coat month, where everyone just walks around looking like a potato. Fashion. If you're trying to be fashionable in Chicago in January, that's not cool.
No.
You got to just be a potato.
And a cute one.
Yeah.
Can you do me a favor? Can you turn your gain up a little bit? It's the knob, and you turn it to the right.
To the right?
Yes.
So, like, what would... Okay.
It's like a dial.
How's that?
A little bit more.
Wait, I turned it to the left.
It looks like it went down, yes.
How's that?
Much better. Cool.
See, I'm not average. I have some learning disabilities. Come on.
Averagely disabled. So, Brooke.
Yes.
You got to this, but I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Today sucks.
Yeah.
This episode comes out on Monday, January 20th.
Oh, no.
The day that Donald Trump is inaugurated for the second time. Brooke, welcome to fascist America for real now.
I don't want it.
It is a dark day for our country, for queer people, for immigrants, for people of color, for women and disabled people, and anyone with love in their heart. But most importantly, it is a dark day for the Grover Cleveland stans, who now can't say that their boy was the only president with non-consecutive terms. Sorry, Grover heads.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. But God, I hope it's Grover Cleveland. Otherwise, this would be a very embarrassing joke. He was president, and then not president, and then president again.
Yeah.
And it was really cool. And now it's not cool anymore.
Trump wrecked it just like everything else.
Before we get into the subject of today's episode, Brooke, how are you doing?
Slowly becoming more and more nervous because you walked in here to set everything up and you're like, tonight's going to be so fun and great. And I was like, oh, good. And then now you've slowly been dropping these little bombs like, this is going to be heavy. And you asking me how I'm doing at this point in the podcast makes me nervous.
Do you have any plans to get through Monday specifically or the next 4 years generally?
Yeah, I do. And it's a lot of what I did before. I'm being honest about this. This is what I tell my clients. Do not engage more than you need to. And the one thing I've been saying is, if there's something you need to know, you will find out. Do not go down rabbit holes of Trump speeches and all of this stuff. And a lot of my clients say, well, that feels a little bit like privilege because I have the option. I'm like, then great. Go do something else with your time and with your privilege and all of that. Like, go stay local, help people out a little bit, whatever. But do not drown yourself in the conservative content.
Yes.
Right?
That's actually a big piece of what we're going to be talking about today.
Great.
I have this later on somewhere, but I was in my freshman year of college when Trump was elected the first time, and I wasn't as, this is not me trying to be defensive, I wasn't as like full-on cringy liberal in the hashtag resistance, but I was pretty involved in it. I followed the Mueller probe very closely. I was in all the stuff. And that's exhausting and actually incredibly not productive.
Yeah, I wore a pussy hat.
Aw.
No.
Do you still have it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone made it for me.
That's cute.
We're not really supposed to wear them anymore, but...
Yeah. It's very much a moment in time.
Very much so.
So today's book comes from a confluence of a couple of different events. I actually didn't realize until pretty late into the writing process that we were releasing an episode on Inauguration Day, so this wasn't like a pre-planned thing. And I also didn't originally plan to cover this book on the podcast. It's not a Dobson book. I first heard of this book on the tremendous podcast called QAA, formerly QAnon Anonymous, of which I have been a longtime fan, I think since like episode 5. This is a show that tracks the evolution of the QAnon conspiracy theory and movement, which we have referenced before. They are some of the leading experts on QAnon, a title that is only less depressing compared to being an expert on James Dobson. On November 26th, they released their 303rd episode with special guest Talia Lavin, the author of our book today. Editing Jake here. So throughout this episode, I consistently mispronounce the name of this author. Her name is Talia Lavin. Talia Lavin. It's even more embarrassing for me because I looked into it and confidently made the wrong choice. So my sincere apologies to Talia, whose incredible book you should absolutely buy. When you're trafficking the world of conspiracy theories, you're bound to talk about evangelicalism. Our episodes on Left Behind are but one example of the intersection of these worlds. Talia Lavin spoke beautifully and heartbreakingly in detail about the ways that evangelicalism and the Christian right are fighting a spiritual war and how we are all fighting it too, whether we know it or like it or not. So imagine my surprise, dear reader, when Talia name-dropped our podcast. I literally screamed and ran to show my boyfriend, who understandably thought that I'd been grievously injured based on the intensity of my scream and the fact that it was 2 a.m.
Oh my God.
A subject matter expert about evangelicalism who knows about our podcast? I immediately bought her book. And that is what we will be covering today.
Here it comes, out of the backpack.
Wild Faith, How the Christian Right is Taking Over America.
Ooh, okay.
I have actually posted about this book on our social medias and my personal social media.
Uh-huh.
I have perhaps the most sticky notes I've ever had for one book.
A lot. It's a lot of sticky notes. I always like to see the book.
Yes.
So we're pro Talia.
Oh, we love Talia.
This book cover is so fierce. It's like Reputation Taylor's version.
Describe it.
Oh, yeah, right. It says Wild Faith, and then there is a slithering snake crawling through the letters. Oh, and the snake sticks its tongue out, and it's a cross. This is so good. And all the font is in like red and white, like bloody.
And it's a nice hardcover.
Yeah.
I brought this on vacation with me. The people on the plane gave me weird looks about it.
I'm so excited. I wish there was a picture of you in your pink Speedo reading this.
They give me less weird looks for the pink Speedo, actually. Or maybe I just blocked them out from my mind. Anyway, like I mentioned, I didn't originally plan to cover this book. I bought it for my own personal reading because, yes, I read this shit on my own time, too. My mental health is doing great.
I'm going to buy it.
I picked up a great time to give up weed.
Oh, how's that going?
It's going. The nightmares continue, but that's part of the process.
Can you write a book someday just called The Nightmares Continue?
I feel like that's a great biography title.
Okay.
As I read this fantastic book, and I realized our episode was dropping on Inauguration Day, it was Kismet. This book is one of the best pieces of reporting I have read on evangelicalism. It weaves the threads of history, personal experiences, and philosophy in ways that I have rarely, if ever, seen done, including by people who lived in the evangelical world. We are not going to go through every part of this book. I do want to use it to ground our discussion on this dark day. I think it lays out the stakes of the second Trump term, and honestly helps us understand how we got here, and references point from basically every episode we've ever done.
Yes.
This book is split into 2 parts. Part 1 is called How You Win a Spirit War. It's a look at the history and the philosophy of the Christian right. And part 2 is Family, how that philosophy and history has real human costs. Our episode today will diverge from that structure. I cannot recommend this book enough, and we cannot do it justice of an episode. So today, we will use this book to talk about how we got here, what the fuck they want, and what do we do about it. But first, I do need to praise this book a little bit more. One of the reasons I love this book for this podcast is that it features some of the very scumbags and their shit media that we've talked about and will talk about in the future. James Dobson, of course.
Of course.
And Fadif are mentioned through the book.
Mm-hmm.
Editing Jake here. For those of you playing along at home, FOTF is what we call Focus on the Family. F-O-T-F. FOTF.
There's a passage where she quotes Dare to Discipline explicitly. She talks about I Kiss Stating Goodbye
Oh, yes.
at Purity Balls.
Purity
The Duggars are mentioned a number of times.
I'm going to buy this book tonight.
It's so good.
Does she mention the most important thing?
The Holy Bone.
Holy Bone.
So no, but also not no. We'll talk about it a little bit later.
Great.
She does talk about how weirdly horny a lot of evangelical stuff is.
If you weren't raised in this culture, it can feel like decoding some secret language. This book, and I hope our podcast, is meant to help give you the keys to deciphering it. It was fun? That's not the right word. It was fun to find these moments of overlap, like, oh my god, we've talked about this. Or, in the case of, for example, a guy named Bill Gothard, oh boy, we're gonna deep dive into this at some point.
Is this the first book, aside from Norman Rockwell, written by someone that we like?
That very well could be.
Oh, this is exciting.
Yeah. It was bad for my mental health in other ways.
Yeah, great.
I'm going to be quoting long passages from this. Talia Lavin is an incredible writer. So unlike Dobson, I can't just like pick out a sentence and be like, oh my god, look at this bullshit. The narrative and the prose is so strong. So this is some of the quotes are going to be a little bit longer than normal.
Jake, I'm starting to feel a little jealous of Talia Lavin.
You have beautiful writing. I love the episode you did. It was perfectly average.
Shut up. If we're going to leave this in, then we need to let the readers know that I got the results of a psych eval this week and I am 100% average.
This is the face of good mental health.
Okay.
Quote, the United States is and has always been a Christian nation. Not necessarily in the sense of a theocracy, but in the sense that Christianity permeates every aspect of public life and undergirds the basic assumptions of what private life should look like for everyday people. It's the background music, the kind that bores into your mind for the first few minutes in an elevator with its insistent, pleasant drone, or that you notice in the first few minutes after strolling into a CVS, but that eventually fades by its own ubiquity into something you don't notice until it stops. They have all of these things working in tandem to create the rhythm of war music, the kind that shakes the ground under your feet. Read this book and learn the melody of war. Only then can you take up whatever instruments you must and begin a countermarch of your own, the strange and beautiful cacophony of free will.
Wow.
Yes. One of the reasons I love this book, as I mentioned, is that Talia is an incredible writer. This motif of sound and music is recurring throughout the book and taps into one of the visceral experiences I've had throughout my deconstruction journey. One of the main reasons I started this podcast, and something that I spend so many years thinking about, is how so many non-evangelicals just don't understand evangelicalism. They don't understand the way that it moves, the interconnectedness of it, the slipperiness of its language, as we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't seem to understand how powerful of a political movement it is. If not for white evangelicals, we don't have Donald Trump. And that's just for one instance.
Right.
More quotes from the book. That's the thing about zealotry. Its excesses often seem ridiculous and can be pointed out as such. But to the people who believe, really believe, to the bone, it is deadly serious. And if you're not paying attention, if you're sniggering at the absurdity of the details and thinking that all of this is beneath the attention of the logical mind, well, the death in question might just be your own, whether a slow death by cruel policy or the hot, fast death meted out by a militant faithful.
My God.
A different quote. According to the Public Religion Research Institute, evangelicals make up about 14% of the American population. Half of that is 24 million people. They are an enormously influential bloc, both culturally and politically. Yet all too often, the coverage of this group is an odd mix of undue deference, uncritically reproducing the propagandist notion that fundamentalist communities are the epitome of family values, conflating white evangelicalism in particular with a kind of real Americana, and a dripping, shucks condescension that views the ideas and experiences of evangelicals as fundamentally ignorant and unserious. Writing about the American right without Christianity is like rendering the Mona Lisa without her eyes, or creating a cup without the bottom. Christian viewpoints and principles, the structures and social impetus of religion, are central to it. I have never been one to make nice for its own sake, to assure people that it'll be okay, when I don't know that it will. I find those platitudes nauseating and infantilizing. We can find other ways of reassurance without fucking lying. So today, of all fucking days, let's drop the pretense. Evangelicalism has won, at least for now. The movement that has festered under liberal condescension and deference now controls literally every level of power in the United States government. And it has a fucking score to settle. To make it through whatever the future brings, and to have any chance of making a better future out of it, we have to be clear-eyed about what exactly is going on. So how do we get here? One of the things I appreciate about this book is how it ties our current realities to the history of the Christian right in the US, before Billy Graham and before James Dobson made evangelicalism a political identity. We've touched on this before, but America was not founded as a Christian nation as the fascists would have you believe. Many of the founding fathers were deists and also really young, people who vaguely believed in the idea of God, and because they were from England, they often used the language and iconography of Christianity, but they're by no means fundamentalists or evangelicals. However, Christian fundamentalism has been present throughout our history. The Pilgrims, who famously fled England for freedom from religious persecution, were fucking weirdos. They were fundamentalists who were too conservative for the Church of England. What do you know about, the Pilgrims' beliefs?
Oh. I mean, I don't know specifics, but I know that they were, wild.
Yeah. I mean, that's the Salem witch trials.
I mean, look at their outfits.
Yes, look at their outfits. And it's not just our founding myths. From Wild Faith, quote, America's profound spiritual susceptibility is epitomized in its Great Awakenings, 4 successive waves of religious fervor that swept the country in 3 successive centuries since the 1700s. Brooke, I don't know if you know this. I took AP US History in high school, so I'm basically an expert now.
Jake, I don't know if you know this, but I didn't take any AP classes because I was average.
Do you know anything about the Great Awakenings?
No.
Cool. I have, because RIP Public Education is the next line that I've written down. So, a very brief history lesson taught by Professor Jake. The first Great Awakening in the United States was roughly 1730 to 1740, before we were officially a country. This is when the rhetoric of revival was created, and the idea that information should be shared democratically. This Great Awakening played a not insignificant role in the American Revolution. The Second Great Awakening took place from roughly 1790 to 1840, and is perhaps most notable for its embrace of fire and brimstone preaching. Although it also informed movements such as the temperance movement, no alcohol, abolition of slavery, although they're still really fucking racist, and the first wave of the women's rights movement in the United States, which also is very problematic.
Yes.
Interestingly, this time was bookmarked by the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. I'm sure that doesn't mean anything. The Third Great Awakening was roughly the 1850s to 1930s and had strong elements of social activism. Here we saw things like Jehovah's Witnesses and the Holiness Movement, of which Dobson's dad was a part of it. This is why Dobson believes in the process of sanctification and believes that he's literally holy, that fucker.
I never thought about Dobson having a dad.
I know. His dad was a preacher.
Oh, yeah. I did actually think I know that.
Comes from a long line of preachers. Very self-important people they are. This Third Great Awakening believed in post-millennialism, contrasted with premillennialism of Left Behind. Post-millennialism believed that Jesus would only come back after mankind had reformed the earth. So it was very much, in order to make Jesus come back, we have to make the earth good, which is why the social activism was a big part of it. The Fourth Great Awakening was roughly the 1960s to 1980s, the Dobson and Graham years. If you notice, that's all of American history.
Yeah.
There's like, I think I added it up. It's like 90 years that we have not been in a period of like a great awakening. And I would argue that in some ways we were either in a continuation of that fourth great awakening or in a new one. It's up to people smarter than me to decide. We've always been a country full of religious fervor that is constantly redefining our relationship to spirituality. And it makes sense that evangelicalism would grow here, of all places. Hey, Brooke, what happened in the 1960s that might significantly shape the modern evangelical movement?
Civil rights.
That's right, civil rights!
Is that what you wrote?
Yep. I was going to cut you off, but you got it right.
Thanks for your faith in me.
I thought you wanted to give some like really meaningful answers, some really profound. Like,
nope,
you know.
just average.
Yeah.
I'm not bitter about this.
Some quotes from the book. Quote, in the slow unraveling of the Jim Crow legal regime in the United States South, a new phrase, now an indelible part of the lexicon of American politics, was born, or born again, and achieved ubiquity. Religious liberty. It meant, if we nail a cross to the door and say our school is private, we're allowed to exclude black people and keep our tax exemption. According to the historian Randall Ballmer, the real awakening of the religious right as a political force came not in the case of Roe v. Wade. This is a tangent from me, Jake. The Southern Baptist Convention, the church that I grew up in and scourge on the face of the earth, even after Roe v. Wade, was pro-abortion.
Oh.
Back to the quote. It was not a political force after Roe v. Wade, but after a different and far less famous one, Green v. Kennedy. It was the 1970 Supreme Court ruling on a case brought by a group of black parents in Holmes County, Mississippi, who argued that 3 new all-white private K-12 academies being built in the aftermath of school desegregation should be denied tax-exempt status. By that point, white enrollment in the county's public schools had dropped to 0. Segregation academies were cropping up in their place. So there was this Civil War happened. Oh, wow, black people, we got to treat them as people now. Huge backlash from white people, especially white evangelicals, or the people who turn into white evangelicals. And then segregation and Jim Crow. And then finally, in the 1970s, they ruled Brown versus Board of Education, which was a little bit earlier, and then that desegregated schools, but it took a while for that to take effect. And then once they actually started enforcing desegregation in public schools and public areas, people, evangelicals from the South, found a loophole. Like, well, it's public schools. Let's just make a bunch of private schools, call them Christian, make them all white, gets the same thing. A continuation of that is what we see in school choice today, charter schools, right? Like that whole movement, it's just meant to siphon money away from public schools and put it into racist, segregated, and Christian nationalist education programs. God. This book actually talks a lot about that, and we're going to touch on it a little bit as well. Jake again. Evangelicalism as a political identity comes from the pro-segregation movement, especially as it relates to private Christian schools. No hate like Christian love, I suppose. It also explicitly ties money, politics, and faith together. When I say, like, these people are grifters, like James Dobson, I think is a grifter, it's not to say he doesn't believe it. As we've talked about before, like, something that pays your bills, you're really incentivized to believe it.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's a grifter.
And he's a grifter, right?
Mm-hmm. I want to buy this book. It sounds so good.
The way that I do these episodes, I read the book and I put absurd amounts of sticky notes in for quotes that I think are important. And then I compile all of these quotes into a Word document. So when I'm writing the script, I can copy and paste and kind of like move things around. For this one, I have a 30-page document of quotes.
Oh my God, I took the whole book.
Almost, kind of.
I'm not texting. I'm going to stick it in my cart so I don't forget.
2 more quotes from the book before we switch a little bit. Quote, the hostility of federal intervention in the part of the Christian right could also be turned to serve the essentially libertarian ends of the people who gotten filthy stinkin' rich and wanted to stay that way. The people who could double think so skillfully, who could advocate for laws that would surveil women until they were a little more than chattel, and the return of sodomy laws that turned cops into bedroom window peepers, all the meantime trumpeting that they were the true and sole guardians of free speech, religious freedom, and every other form of liberty. They were a useful bunch to keep around, and to keep fed on dark dollars until they grew bold enough to grasp the levers of power. Such people could be persuaded to care about abortion, to vote against gay rights, and, at the same time, to keep corporate taxes very low. One more quote. Quote, the Christian right and big business lobby grew together and commingled, trading zeal for cash and spawning congregants in their thoughts. It was worse than an unholy union. It was a holy one. In the Reagan 1980s, it grew fat and healthy on the corpses of AIDS victims, whose homosexuality meant that they were too sinful and distasteful to cure. In the 1990s, it fed on abstinence-only sex education. And in the early 2000s, it grew fatter still on the post-9/11 wartime nationalism. What this is tracing out, and I think a piece that a lot of people don't really understand, is why evangelicals who claim to want government out of everything also love Elon Musk, also love the police state, the surveillance state, right? They hate it when Joe Biden's in charge, but as soon as Donald Trump's in charge, they love it. They have no problem with it. They're happy to install apps on their phone to monitor their porn usage, for instance, like Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House. Crazy fact. He comes up a lot in this book. It's because the people who are rich are opportunists. They saw these people who, if you could make them think you were on their side, they would have any amount of cognitive dissonance, because when you believe the world is black and white, good and evil, God and Satan, and you're on God's side, kind of doesn't matter what you do. Mm-hmm. This part of the script I have called A Moment for Gaslighting.
That's going to be the name of my autobiography.
One of the most insidious tactics fascists use, and that evangelicals love to use, is gaslighting. Gaslighting is one of those pop psychology words that gets thrown around and feels like it's lost its meaning, like narcissist or OCD. Brooke, do you see people come in talking about these words and throw them around like,
Absolutely.
Well, I know what you mean, but that's not the word.
Yeah, and it's okay. Like, some of these words have entered the lexicon, right? Like, and it's like, yeah, I get what you're saying when you say that this is OCD or this is gaslighting. And then there is like actual clinical, like narcissism and clinical OCD, which is very different and not even totally similar to what we're describing anymore when we talk about those things.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If a client comes in and says, I feel like I was being gaslit, sometimes I'll be like, well, that's not what gaslighting is. And typically that's more to try to get them to get a sense of empathy and understand where the other person was coming from, to really get a more comprehensive side of the story. But sometimes I'm like, I know what you mean. It's fine. I'm not going to. When a person like Dobson or some other professional uses gaslighting colloquially, especially in written published work, I take great issue with it because these words have meanings.
Ask me to define gaslighting.
I was about to.
Okay, great.
Brooke, what's gaslighting?
I already told you.
Brooke, what's gaslighting?
I already told you what gaslighting is.
No, you didn't.
Yes, I did.
No, you didn't.
In fact, I've told you several times. Oh, that felt bad.
I liked it. I liked the bit. OCD isn't just, I like to keep my house clean. A good friend of mine with OCD cannot leave a room in his house without flipping the switch exactly 3 times. Otherwise, he's filled with an overwhelming and undefined sense of dread that something terrible will happen. These words have meaning.
And really quick. Mm-hmm. Also, OCD looks like a million other things.
Yes.
And like checking behavior, which we think of as like checking the lights, checking the oven, it can be a lot more nuanced, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we can talk about like somebody who checks constantly with their partner to say, are you mad at me? Are you mad at me? Are you mad at me? Is checking behavior, right? Mm-hmm. Which can be part of clinical OCD. So anxiety itself can be the compulsion sometimes. And that is hard to explain like on a TV show, but it's sort of what clinical OCD really looks like.
Yeah. In the DSM-5, they separated OCD out from anxiety disorders. It used to be considered an anxiety disorder. The reasons for that don't matter to our audience today and probably are very dry, but I find very interesting.
Yeah.
Also, just one more note. To have OCD, you don't need both obsessions and compulsions. It's obsessive and or compulsions.
That's right.
I like diagnostic criteria, even while I understand that it's problematic. Gaslighting isn't just lying. According to the American Psychological Association, to gaslight someone means to, quote, manipulate another person into doubting their perceptions, experiences, or understanding of events. It is used to control someone, to make them feel crazy. Sometimes implicitly, sometimes that's people's motivation.
To make them feel crazy, or to make them feel guilty, or to make them feel bad. Anything to put yourself in the position of power.
Yes! Mm-hmm. That is a really important aspect that we're going to keep coming back to. Mm-hmm. Take the right wing, and especially evangelicals, and their obsession with calling anything queer, and especially trans, grooming.
Oh, yeah.
Grooming isn't anything that anyone might think hints at sexuality in reference to kids. Grooming is a systematic process of isolating someone, almost always kids, and manipulating the systems around them to sexually abuse them. Quotes from the book, quote, "The truth is that grooming isn't telling kids that they are different kinds of people in the world. It's telling them that they are worth nothing if they're different, that they're fundamentally alone, that no one will help them, and that they shouldn't understand what's happening and why it hurts." For me again, Drag Queen Story Hour isn't grooming. You know what's much closer to grooming? Daddy-daughter dating. Purity balls.
Purity balls. That's right.
Homeschooling can be part of the grooming process for some people. Wild Faith has story after story of child abuse perpetuated and worsened by homeschooling. A fun fact from the book, quote, Connecticut's Child Advocate published a 2018 study of 6 school districts that found that 36% of students withdrawn from public schools came from families that had already experienced at least one documented instance of neglect reported to the state's Department of Child and Families. We are not talking about it here. I'm sure we'll talk about it in the future. Homeschool laws are wild and loose and super problematic, and children are, with an alarming amount of regularity, freely given over to the hands of their known abusers because in the name of homeschooling. That's grooming.
That's grooming.
We will talk more in depth about homeschooling in the future. Do not you worry, readers. It'll be a great time.
I won't be here. No, actually, I would like to have an episode about homeschooling.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I have nuanced thoughts and feelings about it, but the more I research it, the less nuanced my feelings get. This is perhaps my most controversial take on this podcast yet, but I think telling kids you are inherently evil and worthless, you should hate your own creation, which is a fundamental aspect of Christianity, is both morally abhorrent and creates a culture primed for grooming. I think I've told this anecdote on this podcast before, but I have a very distinct memory of being in late elementary school and hearing the Bible verse, "Love your neighbor as yourself," and being confused. I hated myself, and I thought that that's what I was supposed to do. I also don't think it's unrelated that I was molested by someone who gave me validation and a sense of worth, and that occurred at an Easter event. I see these things as inextricably linked.
Mm-hmm.
The evangelical gaslighting goes well beyond this. The notion of "I hurt you because I love you" feels like a type of gaslighting to me. Calling anti-trans bills things like saving adolescents from experimentation. It's their fucking martyr complex, complaining that they're just a small little guy who's being unfairly picked on, you guys, despite literally controlling every branch of government.
Mm-hmm.
That feels like gaslighting to me. And that is part of the reason that I get so worked up and have such strong feelings on days like today.
Yeah.
So, what do they want? Brooke, you got to this before, but I'll hand it to you. What do they want? Why is Dobson doing all of this? Why are all these fucking freaks trying to get kids in homeschooling and...
Power.
Yes. Control.
Mm-hmm.
Obedience. And pain. This isn't news to the I Hate James Dobson family. Dobson's primary goal, and he will say this explicitly, in child rearing is obedience. And here's a quote again from the book. Quote, "In 1970, a child psychologist named James Dobson published a book, Dare to Discipline, that would galvanize a movement towards biblical parenting. He positioned it as a necessary curative for the permissive, sinful culture that had swept through the U.S. in the 1960s. Dobson's vision was undergirded by a repulsion at widespread social chaos, and at its core, this was his solution: the enforced submission of children to absolute authority. His vision of molding legions of hyper-obedient Christian children was not divorced from politics. Not only did this modern iteration arise as a counter-reaction to the liberalization of the 1960s, but the children produced by this brutal upbringing would go on to be key instruments in the politics of the Christian right." A quote within a quote. Let me do a voice. What's a Dobson voice?
You've done a Dobson voice before.
I do like a sassy Dobson voice.
He's a little bit like... Mm-hmm.
Okay, quote Dobson. "The parent's relationship to the child should be modeled after God's relationship with man," Dobson wrote. "The same love leads the benevolent father to guide, correct, and even sometimes bring pain to the child when it's necessary for the eventual good." He recommended squeezing the trapezius muscle at the base of the neck to control children of all ages. Several people Talia interviewed, said that as a result, any touch on the shoulder still makes them flinch. But Dobson's book says that God created pain as a valuable vehicle for instruction.
I'm kind of into this new Dobson voice.
I figure the more both gay and obnoxious I can make it, the better I feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
In our episode on Dare to Discipline, Ka-chow, I didn't get into the trapezius muscle part because at the time
this is new information to me.
I alluded to it. I said at the time he goes into other details about how to hurt kids, but it felt irresponsible for me to get into it. He goes on for like pages about it. There's an anecdote that I referenced here where he meets like some unruly teenagers in a parking lot that are not his kids, and that's what he does to them. He just like squeezes their neck to make them hurt, and he's very proud of this.
Whoa, this just took me to a really new level. With Dobson.
Dobson's a horrible piece of shit.
Well, I know, but that's
not only socially, just like interpersonally.
Yeah.
I don't know that I mentioned this at the time. I forget which book it was, but like he does beat his dog too. The same things that he applies to his kids, he applies to his dog. Poor Siggy Freud.
Oh, yes. You did talk about this, but isn't that so telling, though, that, like, that's how he views kids, like an animal?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, my God.
Talia made a point here that I guess I knew, but I never, like, really got into my head, which is that we are now dealing with a generation of adults who were raised under Dobson's influence. The people in power were raised under the Dobson stuff. Talia goes into really great detail about like the conditioning of children and how that impacts political stuff, not just Dobson. There's a lot of really great, by great I mean terrible, but used really well quotes about Nazi child rearing philosophies.
I was just thinking that.
They're pretty close to Dobson's.
Yeah.
I almost included a quote here and I would be like, is this a Nazi or is this Dobson?
Interesting. I thought about that actually right as you were saying, like, or maybe it was in her quote saying like, raising this kind of like army of Christian kids that all have the same beliefs. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, I don't think I put it in the final script, but there's this really great quote that goes something to the effect of like, when a child is raised with pain, as an adult, they identify more with the perpetrator than the victim.
Of course.
A book titled God, the Rod, and Your Child's Bod, The Art of Loving Correction for Christian Parents, lamented that in modern homes, quote, everything is controlled by switches, except children, and focused heavily on the innate sinfulness of people of all ages.
God, the Rod, and Your
Child's Bod.
That is horrifying.
Say more.
I don't know. I just got a chill through my whole spine.
There's also a section in this book of Wild Faith that unpacks this like weird focus on spanking as a means of discipline and the ways that it, assumedly unconsciously for the most part, is sexualized.
Yeah.
That they use the rod, the word rod is used all of the time in like spanking manuals, and it's so phallic.
Even something about referring to a child's bod.
Bod, yeah. It's a really good part of the book, by which I mean I feel really awful after reading it, but like in the way that you feel really good and bad after you finish vomiting, like you've dealt with it. The focus on control and obedience really helps elucidate the ways in which this movement functions. Quote, if control is the aim, it does not matter if there's a double standard or a flaw that can be highlighted. The more errant the hypocrisy, the more brazen the contradiction, the stronger the part that continues to advocate these policies grows. Any flaw is null because the people pointing it out mean nothing. They're sinners, fallen from grace, the one burning path. Only the unborn, hypothetical in their sacks, are sacred. The born are inconveniences. Let them break, like earthen vessels, into shards.
Mm.
That control comes at a cost. Talks about the quiverful movement.
I know about that.
Yeah? What do you know about
the Duggars.
Uh-huh. Hey, 19 kids and counting is my note.
Oh my God, yes. Keep your quiver full.
Mm-hmm. Do you know where that comes from?
I don't know where it comes from.
It's a Bible verse. We'll get into it when we talk about the Duggars eventually. But it literally is like you need, as a father, need to have kids, and they're your
arrows
in the fight against Satan. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Horrifying. From this book, quote, the thing about arrows is that they don't start out that way. They start out as wood that needs to be whittled down to size, metal that needs to be forged and beaten, shaped into a weapon while it's soft. One bad wind, an errant surge from the bellows, and an arrow is useless, blunted. It has to be kept carefully under control. Another longer quote, even now, you can't hear them, the kids who are being hurt, over the din of protest by the people who claim to be saving them. That din is everywhere if you listen for it. It's a sound of power uncoiling and trapping women and children who are the least likely to be able to fight back. All over the country, the army of the godly are on the march. Look, and you will see their battle standards unfurled. Listen, and you'll hear the ram horn sounding. Their weapons are the cross, the rod, the wooden spoon. Their objective is to gain complete control of the family sphere, to exact complete obedience. The desire for control basks itself in piety, godly concern, and disingenuous beatitudes, but in its heart is murder, the snuffing out of all that is other and degenerate, all that is disorderly.
Wow.
The prose is so powerful. I cannot describe I can't say like it's really good because it's also describing horrific things.
No, but it's really well written.
It's really well written, and it's visceral. Right? Like I've never read or listened or had media that talks about my experience in a way that like taps into my body's innate. Now the body keeps the score, as they say. It taps into that feeling of this culture that I've spent now 23 episodes trying to put it into words and a lifetime trying to explain.
Did you say 23 episodes?
Yeah, this is episode 23.
Whoa.
Good for us. It's almost been a year. 24 is a whole year.
Oh my God.
Uh-huh.
If you had asked me a minute ago how many I thought we had, that is much higher than what I would have guessed. Oh, wow. Good for us.
There's one more long quote, and then we'll get into more of a back and forth. But this, so good. Quote, "Their freedom is the unfreedom of others, and they know it. They revel in it. There is no such thing as hypocrisy in a holy war." Talia talks about this one awful lady, Bethany Soy. Well, sure. I don't care about pronouncing her name right. Bethany Soy, who proudly proclaims to be an advocate of religious freedom and writes that she is on the praise team at her church, is at war with trans teens and their families. Their discomfort and pain are her joy, because she believes that she will succeed at forcing them back into the closet, the better to fit into the bed of Christianity of gender norms. What's a good voice for her? Quote, 80 to 90% of children who are struggling with their identities will come to accept and thrive as their biological sex, she claimed. That statistic has no basis, but it doesn't matter. Truth doesn't seem to matter to her in this or any context, and what she was making was a statement of intent. She wants kids who are questioning their gender to be pressed back into the rigid molds that her faith dictates. If they're too brittle to be mishandled and they break, it's of no concern to her. Casualties are a fact of war, if not its purpose. This is an excellent book, and I cannot recommend it enough. It is also incredibly hard to get through at times. Talia Lavin does something I try to do in education, and that's she quotes people that she's interviewed. Yes, she's telling a story and weaving a narrative, but she gives space for people to talk about their own experiences, to tell their own stories. And, unfortunately, many of those stories are stories of abuse and maltreatment, of internalizing venomous ideologies and hurting the people we love. It's really powerful and forcefully honest, and really difficult. Evangelicals might try to distance themselves from the pain they cause. They can try to abstract behind platitudes like religious liberty and save the children. But the pain is real and deserves to be acknowledged. Talia Lavin does that brilliantly. Readers, I hope that I can do a fraction of the job that she does here. So, what do we do now? This is where we started our episode today.
Okay.
Beyond just taking care of ourselves and tuning out the bullshit of this administration, I think that is a crucial part of it. But how do we fight back?
Well, we don't try to fight them directly. And what I mean by that is like exactly what you were just saying and quoting, right? Is like there's no such thing as hypocrisy. There is no, it's like their tool that they have is to just like ignore everything you're going to say. They have an answer for everything, much like evangelicalism in general, right? Mm-hmm. And so we can fight them for sure, but we can't fight, like, don't go on a Facebook thread and fight some Trumper.
Yes.
Right? Like, that is not helpful or useful to anyone and just makes you sad and bad mental health, right? Mm-hmm. So find other things to do, other ways. We can talk about it, but yeah. Yes,
absolutely. Their thing is control. Mm-hmm. That also means control of the narrative, control of what is called in politics the Overton window, what is allowed to be discussed. Don't give in to that. Don't fight on their terms. When they say, like, trans people are groomers, maybe they believe it, maybe they don't. That doesn't matter. They're not making a logical argument. They're forcing you to debate that one position, and then all of a sudden the conversation has moved to that position. Don't give in to it.
Editing Jake here again. I think that Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear does a great job with this, about queer and trans issues especially. You might recognize Kentucky for not being a pinnacle of tolerance, but Beshear has consistently stood up for queer people and has consistently won re-election statewide. When he vetoed a bill that would have significantly impacted the rights of trans kids, he didn't try to debate the timeline for if or when kids should have access to things like puberty blockers. Instead, Beshear said, quote, "My faith teaches me that all children are children of God, and Senate Bill 150 will endanger the children of Kentucky." When he came under fire for taking a picture with a drag activism group I personally love, called the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, he didn't try to debate when and where drag is acceptable. He said, "Everyone in Kentucky counts." This is what I mean by not letting them control the narrative. If you want to know more, the fabulous YouTube channel Innuendo Studios has a video called Controlling the Conversation that dives more into this rhetorical strategy.
Today is a hard day for many reasons, but for me, it feels like the abusive ex I finally broke up with after many years is now both the mayor and the cops. It feels like the escape that almost killed me kind of didn't matter. The police were in on the conspiracy. Not enough people heard me or believed me or cared. It feels like they won. And I feel defeated and scared and fucking angry. I was a freshman in college when Trump was elected the first time. I had just left the church and was super early in my deconstruction. I had so much fury, but also optimism. I believed in the hashtag resistance. I was there protesting when Trump was sworn in. I literally made eye contact with him as he marched from the Capitol to the White House and got to flip him off, which was fun.
Oh, really?
Yeah. My mom was not proud of that. I am. It's also the first time I got put on a federal list.
You were there at the inauguration?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. I was there at the Women's March the next day.
Nice. I didn't go to the Women's March because my shitty ex at the time didn't want me to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Never do things for men.
Thanks a lot, Clyde.
Clyde's a good name for him. I was also there during the Kavanaugh hearings. Living in DC is wild. At that time, it felt like a fluke. It can't be real. That can't be the decision America made. We're better than that. And somewhere in me, I believed that American decency and democracy would prevail. This time around, I'm just tired.
Mm-hmm.
That youthful defiance is still in me, but the admittedly naive optimism isn't there. This isn't a fluke. The narrative is more complicated than half the country wants me dead. But also, some of the people actually really, really do. Denying grief and anger isn't helpful. You are right to be angry. And not all is lost. After the election, I said that hope is an action as much as it is a feeling, and I stand by that. I think that it is important to do hope, even when we don't always feel it. But I do want to end our time today with a few reasons that I have to hope. First, the real power isn't the evangelicals, even though they are a big political movement and it sure can feel like they have won. Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg don't care about the theological implications of queer people. Donald Trump sure shit isn't evangelical. They'll throw anyone under the bus to make a fucking dollar. They just as quickly turn on evangelicals if and when the political winds shift. Second, they can and likely will change the laws in ways that matter and will hurt people. We do need to be clear-eyed about that. But the progress of the last 50 years isn't just laws. The acceptance of interracial marriage and queer people, the conversations around disability and immigrants, the fact that the George Floyd protests were the largest protests in the United States history, these things are real. They are meaningful cultural changes. Clearly, there is a lot more progress to go. But I cannot believe that people are that much of fair weather fans when it comes to their friends, neighbors, and loved ones. No executive order can undo the way that my family has come to not only accept but embrace me and boyfriend. I know I'm privileged there, but I also know that it's not just unique to me. No matter how hard James Dobson wants it, we can never go back to the 1950s. To quote legend Indina Menzel.
You mean Adele Dazeem?
Yes, to quote Adele Dazeem, the past is in the past. Finally, history is full of progress and backlash, oppression and resistance. I've talked about this before on the show, but I often think about what life was like for queer people during the AIDS epidemic. Dobson was literally in positions of power. Dobson was literally in our government, and some of the most influential people were openly celebrating that the right people were dying. And yet, we are still here. People had community and solidarity, still made art and fell in love. I am fortunate enough to know and love people who survived that time. Of course they are traumatized by it, and I never want to romanticize it. But they are around to tell the stories to the people who aren't around anymore, to honor their legacy and keep fucking pushing for progress. That's true of marginalized people all over the world and all throughout time. We shouldn't have to, and a heartbreaking number of people won't make it out, and we won't make it out without our scars. But, as I've said before, the joy and love we will experience is as inevitable as the pain. So what do? We take care of ourselves. Mm-hmm. We take care of each other. We don't give in to despair, and we don't give up. I read an excellent piece recently by D.L. Mayfield in their excellent Substack, Healing is My Special Interest, which is an incredible title, which ended with something that I really needed to hear. It's the last bullet point titled, "It's time to get creative and weird and ... happy, ? Quote, annoy the Christian fascists by not living in miserable fear for the next however many years. Be the strong-willed child who refuses to obey in advance. Because most of all, the best way to actually resist a Christian end-times cult that has taken over your country is to live as if the world wasn't actually going to end." From the incredible Talia Lavin, 2 more quotes. Quote, "For readers of this book, I ask 2 things. The first is to really and truly acknowledge that people who say they believe these things, that, for example, the fate of the U.S. rests in a spiritual war between Jesus and the forces of hell, which are everywhere manifest, and that God is watching and listening and rooting for their side, really and truly believe that. They really and truly want the United States to become Christ's kingdom and will do everything in their power to make that vision a reality. And your actions in response should be informed of that truth. I do not ask that you unwind your condescension. I ask you to ask yourself what is hidden from you by your own laughter. Not only the danger to your country, to democracy, to the rule of law and institutions and abstractions that mean a great deal to a great many people, not even the danger to yourself, if you fall outside the narrow prerogatives of zeal that is ready to erase you in the name of a wild and ungovernable faith. I ask you what your laughter obscures, because in it may be the pain of a great many people who cannot speak for themselves, because they are too young or too frightened. They believe they deserve it. And no one deserves that kind of pain. I do not call myself a patriot. That word was taken from me long ago, and it's too easily used by people who use it as a license to smite the unrighteous. I do believe that the earth should not be bitter, not be salted with the tears of the weakest among us, not be gashed by the rage of those who have grown strong in the pain of others. And the piece of it that I'm standing on, beside you, is worth fighting for. Reader, they cannot actually control you. They cannot kill your heart, your anger, your love. They cannot take away the fact that I've watched Defying Gravity at least 15 times and cry every fucking time, including while writing this episode.
You love Defying Gravity so much.
We are holding space for the lyrics of Defying Gravity in the house. If I've learned anything in my time being a therapist and my time being a person on the world, it's that humans are resilient. Joy is radical. Authenticity is radical. Love and creativity and community are radical. The world is a better place with you in it. Unless you are James Dobson.
Or Donald Trump.
I fucking hate James Dobson.
I fucking hate James Dobson. I hate Donald Trump. I hate everything. But I love Talia Lavin. And I love you, Jake.
I love you too, Brooke. So that is the end of the formal part of our episode. There are a lot of exciting things on our horizon, so stay tuned for some new expansions in the I Hate James Dobson universe. But our next episode, I am so excited to say, we will have the honor of interviewing Talia Lavin.
What?
Yes.
Oh my god!
So readers, stay tuned in 2 weeks for that interview.
That's so exciting! I didn't even know that.
Yes, I've kept it a secret. I'm very, very excited, very honored.
Oh, I feel scared. And excited.
We're going to talk about it after air to get prepped for it.
Good thing I just bought her book.
Yes.
God. Is she coming here in person?
No. God, no. Readers, stay tuned. There's other stuff coming down the pipe that Brooke and I are talking about and working on.
Did someone say Duggar's episode?
Duggar's episode? Did someone say Bill Gothard? Did someone say merch?
I've been saying merch this whole time. What do you all want?
Yes, let us know. We have some ideas, but I'd be fascinated to know what people would actually want and buy, because I don't want to make useless junk.
But I really just want a shirt that just says, quote, Kevin.
I think the quotations are going to make it.
Yeah.
Reader, please take care of yourself,
Yes.
especially today. Things are going to be tough. Conserve your energy. We love you very much.
We love you very much. Stay strong and do not get distracted when they try to distract you. Just keep going every day.
I Hate James Dobson is a labor of love, written, recorded, edited, and produced by me, Jake. I'm honored to be joined by my amazing co-host, Brooke. If you're enjoying the show, please consider rating and reviewing it, and if you want to connect with us more, you can find us on TikTok, maybe, Instagram, YouTube, Reddit, and Blue Sky at I Hate James Dobson, and, unfortunately still, on Twitter at I Hate JDobs. If you want to email us, you can do so at ihatejamesdobson@gmail.com. Special thanks, as always, to Drew, Lindsay, DJ, and Jack. Our theme music is by Mood Maze, and the song is called Trendsetter. Thank you for enjoying the show.